T.S. Eliot was wrong. My world ended with a bang the minute we entered the compound, and that silver door closed behind us. The sound was brutal, final, an echoing, resounding boom that slashed my 9-year-old heart in two. My fist beat on the door. I bawled. The screaming left me hoarse, and my feet hurt. Through my ears, the, through my tears, the bear and the elk on my father's shirt swam together. Beneath the chamois, my dad's head heaved. The previous 40 minutes had left us out of breath. Finally, my gaze focused and went beyond him, searching. I gulped down a painful sob. Had anyone made it? Farther down the corridor, I saw my weeping mother, dressed in a burgundy robe, dark tendrils dangling from her once careful braid. Mom clutched my 6-year-old sister, Therese, a sobbing pigtailed lump in pink flowered flannel. From one small hand dangled her beloved Winnie the Pooh. Behind them stomped my 11-year-old sister Lexi, dark hair mussed, arms crossed over in front of her blue silk pajamas. Not being brother of the year material, I almost didn't care if she made it or not. But my grandmother wasn't in sight. "Where's Gram?" I shouted. Dad patted my head, hard and steady, like I was a dog. He spoke slowly, in the same tone he used to explain the household helped the exact amount of starch he required in his shirts. "Eli, listen to me. There wasn't enough time. I waited as long as I could. It was imperative I get the rest of you to safety. We had to shut the door before it was too late." The door. Always the door. Another look. No sign of my twin brother. He was the person I needed the most. Where was he? My heart pounding suggested I already knew the answer. Eddie? His name caught in my throat, stuck tight by the panic rising from my belly. Dad whirled around, his tone accusing. "I thought Eddie was with you." My head swung from side to side. Between sobs, the words barely choked out. "He went with Graham." Dad's face clouded with indecision, just for a moment. Had that moment lasted, it might have changed all of our futures, but Dad snapped back into control. "I still have one of you." With just 6 words, my childhood ended, as did the rest of the world. I knew what happened that night. We had been prepared. Other kids got bedtime stories about fairies and dogs. We fell asleep with visions of weapons of mass destruction dancing in our heads. Every evening, dinner included updates Dad downloaded from the internet. Updates on the U.S. involvement in the Middle East, the status of the nuclear weapons program in places like Iran and North Korea, names of countries that have been added to the list of those with WMDs. Dad gripped my shoulders and pulled me away from the silver door, twisting me around to follow the rest of my family. What was left of it. I clung to my father's hand. He rushed ahead of me, his hand dropping mine. I lifted my hand to my face, and it reeked of fuel. The corridor ended. We paraded through an archway strung with twinkling white lights, then entered an enormous circular room. The place reminded me of a yurt we'd built in school, only about 80 times bigger. The curved walls were made of log beams, the same type that crisscrossed over our heads in an intricate pattern. The roundness of the room was odd, yet comforting. Unlit logs sat in an elaborate stone fireplace, around which luxurious, overstuffed couches, love seats, and armchairs formed an audience. For a few seconds, despite the situation, my 9-year-old mind pondered what wonderful forts could be made with all these cushions. Mom sat on a green couch and called Therese, while Lexi stood behind them, glowering. Dad lit kindling between the logs in the fireplace. The familiar smell of wood smoke wafted towards us, seemingly out of place in a setting so distinctly unfamiliar. My father put his hand on my mother's shoulder. His knuckles were white. He chose that moment to tell my mother and sisters that Graham and Eddie hadn't made it. The announcement made it real, made it final, a verbal execution. Wails erupted from inside me. Mom and Lexi cried too. I ran to my mother. She held me with Therese. Lexi leaned against Dad, and his arms encircled her. We stayed that way for a long time, my face crushed into Mom's bosom. She smelled of lilacs. As I sobbed, she stroked my hair. Like always, Mom's touch was comforting and warm. Even that night, that heinous night, her touch helped. Our cries sounded over the crackling of logs. After a long while, sobs faded to sniffs and shudders, waning from fresh grief into leftovers. Feeling the need to move, I stood up. I wiped my nose with my sleeve, climbed onto a stool by a large bar with a stainless steel refrigerator behind it. Dad flicked a switch. A plasma television dropped down from the ceiling, blank monitor glowing. I figured we'd be in here a lot. The blue from the television tinted Dad's face and blonde hair in a garish way. He startled me when he threw his arms out to the side. Cozy? Yes? What do you think? It's not what I expected. Mom's voice was shaky. Dad rubbed his jaw. What did you expect? I had a pretty good idea of what Mom was thinking. In third grade, I gave an oral report on nuclear war. If you lived in a target area like we did, you had approximately 40 minutes after your nuclear weapons were launched. 40 minutes to do what? Say goodbye to loved ones. Stuff yourself with donuts. Take a 100-mile-an-hour joyride. Whatever one did with only 40 minutes left to live. What if you were like me, the son of Rex Yankakis, billionaire? Those 40 minutes were spent escaping to an underground shelter, built specifically for the Yankakis family. Here, I would live out the next 15 years in luxurious comfort while nearly everyone else perished. We hadn't seen the shelter, only heard Dad talk about it. So I think Mom felt like I did, a little surprised the place actually existed. I don't know. Mom's head swayed slightly. The movement caused a tear to drip off the slope of her nose. At least it's quiet down here. Dad observed her for a moment, then he switched off the television. Eli? Lexi? Want to see your rooms? Our grave circumstances had not yet sunk in. I was a robot, dazed simply sliding off the stool to follow my father and my older sister. It felt like a dream. Through a doorway on the opposite side of the room from where we'd enter, we proceeded down a long, carpeted hallway similar to the ones in our house in Seattle. Only difference was this one smelled of vanilla and had a constant hum of a generator. Dad narrated as we walked. All the walls are reinforced, as we discussed, to keep out radiation, but the concrete is not pleasant to look at, so the rooms are furnished in wall-boarded wood. I don't want you to feel surrounded by concrete and steel. Dad stopped in front of a purple door. Lexi pushed it open and squealed. Leave it to her to cheer up over material possessions. Like something out of an Arabian Nights book, silk tapestries and curtains of bright colors were draped everywhere. A monstrous canopy bed ran the length of the whole wall. There was an exotic, cloying aroma. Incense, maybe? Lexi disappeared into the closet. When Dad talked about the compound, he told us that we'd have duplicates of everything we treasured. What an idiot I had been to believe everything I cherished could be reproduced. We left Lexi to explore and continue down the corridor. Dad indicated my room on the right. I pushed open the red door. Fresh-smelling, meadowy air blew softly into my face. A bed took up the entire near wall, but there was no canopy like Lexi's. Instead, I looked up at the night sky. Dad's hand squeezed my shoulder. The constellations rotate. It's time to be accurate from sundown to sunup, and we'll alter with the seasons. You can even choose the southern hemisphere if you'd like. During the day, bulbs mimic the actual progression of the sun. Of course, you have artificial light available at any time, but I thought you might miss your sunsets. My sunsets? Not just mine, I wanted to shout at him. They were Eddie's sunsets, too. Every day since we were 7, Eddie and I sat in the front lawn of our estate and watched the sun over Puget Sound. The evening ritual began with Els, an old lady from Belgium who was one of our family's cooks. Hardly taller than Eddie and me, she wore her silver hair in a bun and squeaked around in white orthopedic shoes. As a rule, she never smiled. One evening after dinner, she set out ice cream in bowls for sundaes, then left us to make our own. Sometimes we'd make a little mess, usually just drippings on the counter, smears of chocolate sauce. But that day I dropped a scoop of ice cream on the red-tiled counter. Instead of just picking it up, I poured fudge sauce over it. Eddie giggled and squirted whipped cream on top. I added a few cherries. We laughed. Then we filled our dishes. Before we were done, Els returned. She saw the chaos and must have known I caused it. She shook her finger in my face, speaking with a strong accent. Brat, you were always a brat. She grabbed me by one ear. Her pinching grip was extra firm, from decades of kneading, I imagine. She had no trouble dragging me out the door. I fell to my knees on the soft lawn. My ear hurt, and I rubbed it while scowling up at her. I'm telling my dad. Els raised her hands. What will he say? He tells you always, go out, get fresh air. I give you fresh air. She slammed the door. Eddie had followed us outside with the ice cream sundae in each hand, splotches of whipped cream adorning his face. He sat down next to me and handed me a bowl. Banished to the lawn, we ate our ice cream and perceived the sunset as an actual event for the first time ever. The next day we found ourselves waiting for it to happen again. Sunsets, imitation or not, would no longer be the same. Still knowing my dad expected it of me, I lamely thanked him for such an extravagant special effect. The room was done in the primary colors that appealed to boys of 9. One wall had shelves that stretched into the stars, and a speedy scan revealed my favorite books and other possessions, copies of course. Dad asked me if I wanted to see more of the compound. I didn't. We'd have to wait 15 years before it'd be safe to go outside, which left more than enough time to see the rest of the compound, our new world, a new world I would soon hate. Dad rubbed my shoulders. Suddenly, his touch suffocated me. My stomach lurched, and I thought I might be sick. I wriggled down, away from his grip. We went back to the family room. Therese slept on the couch. When Mom saw us, she shifted Therese off her lap and stood. Her eyes were vacant as she went behind the bar and made an instant hot chocolate with marshmallows in the microwave. I don't recall finishing my drink. I remember feeling the emptiness in my gut and the guilt. Nothing would ever be the same without Eddie, but I had to live with that. Why? Because it was my fault he wasn't there. My fault Eddie was dead. That night, I blamed myself. Almost 6 years later, the feeling was strong, as was the feeling that now was all were right in our new world. Chapter 1. Therese dribbled past me, switching hands as I taught her. A few months shy of 12, she'd gotten taller in the last year, but still only came halfway up my chest. With her dark hair and the same braid she always had, the shrimp were closer to 10. Mom, Lexi, and Therese had white t-shirts and velour jogging suits in every color that particular clothing company produced. Even though Therese had plenty to choose from, she always wore purple. Little Miss Perfect annoyed me. The way she always seemed so hell-bent on doing the right thing. Fluent in French, she also played the oboe. Hers was custom-made of the best Granelia, African black wood. Dad brought it home from Paris when Therese was 5. What other kid that age had a $10,000 oboe? I suppose I couldn't talk. Dad bought my $4,000 Genson trumpet when I was 6. But down here, my choices of people to hang out with were limited. Time wasn't. Almost 6 years in the compound. 6 years. Well over 2,000 days, most of them pretty much the same. But routine tends to equal comfort, which does provide some semblance of security. My alarm went off at 7. I rose to do Tai Chi for half an hour. Graham had taught Eddie and me the summers we stayed with her in Hawaii. The exercise ritual made me feel closer to both of them. Then I showered. The bathroom was dark blue marble, with a huge whirlpool tub as well as a step-in shower that could hold an entire football team. A mirror ran the length of the room, and I had 2 sinks all to myself. I switched every other day, and with no particular reason why. Guess I relished having an option. Not a lot of those underground. Most days I weighed myself and checked out my body in the mirror. I was 6 feet and still growing, 180 pounds, and my muscles were well defined. Was I vain? I don't think so. I worked hard at getting my physique to that level. The outside was a lot easier to perfect than the inside. For obvious reasons, thoughts of Eddie invaded me most when I looked in the mirror. If he were alive, I wondered, would he have the same build, same hair? Looking to control some aspect of my life, I refused to cut my hair after I turned 12. It fell past my shoulders. Sometimes I let it down, so I had to peer out from behind a curtain. I couldn't see anyone. Made me believe they couldn't see me either. I pulled my hair back into a ponytail secured with bands I'd taken from Lexi. It was nice having the same face as Eddie. I never had to struggle to picture him. I simply looked in the mirror. Some days that face was a comfort, but other days I couldn't bear to see his face or mine. Every day I dressed in jeans and a t-shirt emblazoned with Dad's company logo, YK, the biggest computer manufacturer and software developer in the world. On in the compound, Dad explained there was clothing in every size we might possibly need. He just neglected to mention that while sizes were limitless, style selections were not. In addition to jeans and YK t-shirts, my wardrobe consisted of gray sweatpants. Certainly didn't take me long to pick something out in the morning. In our world, my favorite shirt was an orange and white striped rugby. Eddie had one too, but he never wore his. I loved the orange so much that I practically wore out the shirt. When we arrived down here, there was only one in my closet, but I outgrew it. After I told Mom it was too small, it just didn't come back from the laundry. I've missed the color. If I could have one new thing to wear, it would have been a big orange hooded sweatshirt. My routine also included running 6 miles on the treadmill in the gym every morning. The gym was big, the type you'd see at a school or the YMCA, with an extra 50 feet or so at the end for fitness machines. A rower, an elliptical machine, a treadmill, and a recumbent bike made up the cardio part, with a boatload of free weights for the strength portion. No one lifted weights except me anymore. In the old world, and for a time in the new, Dad was obsessive about exercise. He was obsessive about a lot of things, but exercise was near the top. He told me that a powerful man should have a powerful body as well. He's the one that got me into lifting and running every day, so I was surprised when he just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing where you just skip a day and then start up again. One day he just stopped. I never saw him set foot in the gym again. I didn't ask why. I never asked why. We weren't allowed to question our father in the old world, and the same rule applied in the compound. Anyway, nothing he would say would change our reality. Besides, I liked having the place to myself, most of the time. Mom used the cardio equipment when she felt up to it, and once in a while I'd break the routine and shoot baskets with trees. I lunged, stealing the ball from her a bit too rough. I was careful not to let my hands touch her. Since the first night in the compound, I didn't ever touch anyone with my bare hands. You have to protect it, Reese. Therese stopped and looked at me, her green eyes bright. I've been thinking about father. As much as I heard my sister speak every day, I could never get used to that English accent, or the way she called our parents mother and father. Like all of us, she had her own routines, one of which was to watch Mary Poppins at least once a day. She must have seen it more than 1,000 times. I wish the DVD would finally wear out. She sucked on one of her braids. Do you hate him? I shot and missed. Her eyebrows went up. I just wondered. The ball bounced off the wall and rolled back towards me. I retrieved it and dribbled. I ignored her, figuring that she'd keep talking anyway. It was nothing new for her to talk about Dad behind his back, then be all adoring daughter to his face. She kept on talking. I do, you see. I think I might hate him. She caught my pass and did a layup. I shook my head, rebounded, shot again, then caught the ball when it dropped through the net. Granted, I wasn't Dad's biggest fan. He ran our lives in the compound the way he had on the outside. The only one who would ever question Dad's decisions was Gran. She was the one person I'd seen stand up to him. The last time Eddie and I went to Hawaii with her, we almost didn't get to go, and I wanted to go so badly. She lived in a small rural community, all locals descended from a long line of locals, and no one cared who we were. For those short weeks we spent with her every summer, we were just kids from the mainland. At first, Dad refused. He said we should be at home going to science and math camps, but Gran marched into his office, dressed in a hibiscus-covered muumuu. She emerged a few minutes later with a wide smile on her face. Dad had been close up behind, a frown on his. I could only imagine how different things would be in the compound if Gran had made it. For the rest of us, challenging Dad's judgment was out of the question. I'd stop asking him the first year whether he'd be able to make contact with anyone on the outside, and how long our supplies of water, food, and power would last. I planned for every contingency, was the stock reply. And there was a way he would spend a week in bed, then all of a sudden not sleep for days. Weird. Even then, we never voiced our doubts about his leadership. Besides, would it change our situation? Made things better? No. There was no point. We all knew it. Therese bent down to tie one of her shoes. They were the same white top-of-the-line cross trainers that we all wore, which lay in stacked boxes in every size in one of the storerooms. I believe I do hate Father. He did this to us. He made me leave my friends and my school. He makes us stay here. Usually, I just let her motor mouth wear itself out. But I was in an ornery mood. That's pretty stupid. I tossed the ball from one hand to the other. If we weren't here, do you know where we'd be? Of course I do, Therese straightened up. We'd been home in Seattle with Eddie and Clementine. Until that moment, I forgot about Clementine. Therese's ragdoll kitten. Clementine was cute and acted more like a dog than a cat. As allergic as he was, Eddie played with Clementine until he wheezed. Eli, you'd be there with Coco. Her tone was nannyish and condescending. Just the mention of Coco's name made my breath stop for a minute. My chocolate lab puppy, a constant fixture in my bed and at my side. I missed her, but I pushed away the memories. You're being ridiculous. No one is there anymore. You know about the bombs, right? Eli, her voice got louder, and she was still matter of fact. Perhaps we find someone. Perhaps others are alive. I hate Father for doing this to us. I rolled my eyes and listened to the rant. Little Miss Perfect was losing it. I knew what the whole situation had done to me when I was 9. I couldn't imagine what the adverse effects it had on my almost 6-year-old mental health state. Actually could, given the whole Mary Poppins thing. Making up a scenario you could live with was easier than dealing with a reality you could not. I understood the benefits of that. Okay, I said. Her eyebrows went up in sync with the corners of her mouth. So do you believe me? Of course. Among other talents, I had always been a decent liar. Teresa's shoulders dropped. I miss home dreadfully. I wish we were there with Graham and Eddie. Yeah, well, I wish in one hand, crap in the other, and see what fills up first. I'd always been a sour jerk. Grow the hell up. Eddie's dead, Graham's dead, they're gone, forever. Deal with it. My sister's mouth dropped open and then slowly closed. Her eyes narrowed. You're not at all like Eddie. It was definitely time for her to leave. My toes lined up slightly behind the free throw line. Every day I shot 300 of them. I started shooting them on the first full day here. After 6 years, my percentage had improved to 84. You don't even remember Eddie. You were too young. I do so remember him. She tilted her head a bit, studying me. He looked like you. My follow-through was practice and precise. That's a little easy, don't you think? Swoosh. You see me every day. Her hands were on her hips. He wasn't all mean like you. He was nice, and he cared more about stuff. My first thought was to protest, but I realized it wasn't worth the breath. She was right. I got the rebound and lined up again, trying to concentrate, pretend she was a jeering crowd. It wasn't much of a stretch. Therese continued to pounce. At least he played with me. You never did. You always ignored me. You even teased him for playing with me. You said I was a baby. There wasn't much to say in my defense. In the old world, Eddie and I were so close that I never made a point of reaching out to our sisters. The reason was simple. I didn't need them. Between school, ballet, and piano, Lexi wasn't around for much, but Therese was. Eddie always saved time for her. The ball left my hands. The shot was good. Therese kept up her hand. You ignored me in here until I was 10. Her face was red, but I knew she wouldn't cry. Early on, she learned, as we all did, that tears didn't help. They wouldn't bring back anything or anyone. She held up 4 fingers as I jogged after the ball. 4 years, Eli. 4 years. You didn't even look at me. There was good reason for that. She reminded me too much of Eddie, the way she was kind to everyone, same as my mom. Part of me hated Therese for being so good, for being the one everyone adored. It made me miss her more. Despite the fact that I tended to treat Therese badly, she was coming back for more. Maybe because I was as close as she was ever going to get to Eddie. Even so, I knew where she was coming from, missing Eddie like she did. I was sure she'd rather have him instead of me. Eddie was the kind of older brother anyone would want. He had always been the kind of brother I wanted. For 9 years, he'd been the kind of brother I had. But I screwed that up in a big way. I chucked the ball at my sister, hard, smacking her in the butt. Ow, she scowled. I laughed. You're so mean. Her accent wavered as she got ticked off. She grabbed her ratty old poo from the spot by the door and left, alone at last. But as I shot my free throws, I couldn't stop thinking about what my sister had said. Stupid kid can make up stories. It was definitely a coping mechanism, but my gut was wrenched. Was it the mention of Eddie? Or the fact that someone besides me admitted that they thought about him on a regular basis? Even though it was just Little Miss Perfect, someone besides me believed that he was out there somewhere, alive. I tried so hard not to think of him, not to believe he might have survived. People often talk about the uncanny connections between identical twins, about twins raised separately who end up innately similar. That wasn't the case with Eddie and me, as we were always together, everything in our environment the same. We took our first steps the same day, lost our first baby teeth within hours of each other, both grew 2 inches in the same summer, and we had our roles. He was the leader. I let him lead, because I like to follow. Followers were rarely accountable for their actions. In addition to leading, Eddie was also my protector, always had been. We were 8 years old the last summer we stayed with Gran in Hawaii. One afternoon, we picnicked by a waterfall. Eddie and I lived in board shorts and rash guards that summer. Graham, smelling of white shoulders, wore a red muumuu, her long hair loose, a pink pua flower behind each ear. She spread a dolphin print beach towel on the grass before laying down out an appetizing buffet of spam and rice, leftover Kahlua pork. Eddie's daily ration of jerkling's beef jerky, which he couldn't live without, fresh mangoes and guava juice. For dessert, a small cooler held my favorite strawberry mochi ice cream balls. We finished lunch. Eddie and I took a frisbee and went off by ourselves. I followed Eddie up a steep hill and tossed the disc to him. The breeze from the falls pushed it back my way. I grabbed for it, missing, reaching so far that I lost my balance. As I tumbled down the hill, my back slammed into a tree. It stopped my downward progress, knocking away my breath. Arms waving, legs kicking, I struggled for air. Eddie stood at the top of the hill. Over the rushing water, he called to me, Eli, stop moving. Minutes passed. My breath came back. I moved to get back on my feet. Again, Eddie called me, Eli, don't move, I'm coming. Like a crab, he inched his way down the hill. As he came closer, his eyes narrowed at something past me. I twisted my head in order to see what he saw. A tree that had taken my breath was the only thing between me and a long, fatal drops on the rocks beneath the falls. I reached out for my brother. Eddie pressed both palms to my chest and calmed me. Eli, I got you. He gripped my arm, and we crawled up the hill together. At the top, relieved, I rolled over onto my back, panting. Don't tell Graham. Eddie was also winded. Duh. Being in the compound without Eddie seemed to get harder every day. We didn't talk about it much. Dad had said early on that this was our life and we should move on, not keep thinking about the way things used to be. After talking to Therese that morning in the gym, remembering Eddie, all I wanted was to talk to him and pretend he could hear me. I tried to imagine our lives as they might have been. Sort of, but what would Eddie do? If things were normal and we were in the old world, going to high school, Eddie would probably have a million girlfriends. He had all the friends in grade school, and I knew that I was in the mix only because of him. High school wouldn't have been much different. I'd be getting dragged out on double dates with his girlfriend's friends. Knowing Eddie, he probably would insist on it. Sometimes my thoughts took a different direction. What would Eddie do if Eddie were here? I hit my 15th free throw. Despite knowing that he and Graham had perished on the outside that night 6 years before, I never truly felt our connection break. There was emptiness, of course, along with a huge feeling of loss. But that feeling of a connection only a twin could understand. That I still had. Lining up my next shot, I started to release the ball. That's off. The voice startled me, even as I tried not to show it, although my lousy shot was proof enough. Dad walked out of the shadows underneath the basket as my air ball went past him. He let it bounce off the wall before catching it, then tossed the ball from one hand to the other. You and Therese have a nice game? Huh? He caught me off guard. Had he heard our conversation? Yeah. Her game needs work, though. Dad chuckled a bit, then tossed me the ball. She has a grand imagination, that one. I nodded, unsure what to say. Walking through the door, away from me, he paused but didn't turn around. I'm sure you can set her straight. Set her straight? Basketball. One hand raised in the air, the wrist flipped a bit. Her game. And he left. Although he didn't come out and say it, I sensed he had heard me and Therese. And after the exchange with my sister that morning in the gym, I wondered what Eddie would do if he were in the compound instead of me. Despite believing I was dead, would he trust the feeling of connection and still hold hope for a miracle? Through 250 more free throws, of which I made 227, I already knew the answer. If there were even the slightest chance in the world was not as it seemed. A tiny slice of hope that his twin would still be alive, he would find out, or else he would die trying.